My name is Margaret Whitmore, and if you had asked me 10 years ago what betrayal felt like, I would have said something neat, polished, and professional. I would have told you betrayal was just another obstacle in business, something to be handled with contracts, lawyers, and the steady hand of experience. Back then, I believed I'd seen it all: hostile takeovers, crooked clients, men who smiled at you in meetings while they drew daggers behind your back. But I was wrong. Betrayal isn't clean. It isn't professional. It's poison in every sense of the word. And in my case, nearly killed me. I'm 60 years old now. I've spent the better part of 4 decades proving myself in a world that never wanted me at the table. I wasn't born into money. My father was a mechanic, my mother a school secretary. What I had was grit, numbers in my head like a second language, and a refusal to let any man tell me no. At 25, I started Whitmore and Steele with a single delivery truck, a leased office barely bigger than a broom closet, and a partner I trusted like a brother. That partner was Victor Steele. He was ambitious, clever, and charismatic in ways I wasn't. I was the strategist. He was the salesman. We made a good team, at least. That's what I thought. Over time, we grew the business into something substantial. We weren't just moving freight. We were managing supply chains, overseeing ports, contracting with cities. Whitmore and Steele became a name people recognized. And I'll be honest, I liked the recognition. I liked walking into rooms and watching men underestimate me, only to leave stunned when I closed the deal. But success draws sharks. And some of those sharks were already swimming in my own waters. Victor wasn't alone anymore. He'd brought in Evelyn about 10 years ago, a woman with a razor-sharp mind and an ego to match. At first, I admired her. She fought her way up the ladder the way I had, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found another woman who understood. But Evelyn didn't want partnerships. She wanted power. She craved it like oxygen. And then there was Daniel, the youngest. Barely in his 40s, but with the cocky grin of someone who thought he'd cracked the code to life because he'd learned how to move numbers around on spreadsheets. Together, they formed a trio that grew more dangerous than any competitor outside the company. It started with small things. I'd walk into a meeting and find conversations cut short. Victor brushing off my questions with a slick, "Don't worry about it. Look, Margaret, we've got it handled." Evelyn rolling her eyes at my suggestions. Spring to Daniel when she thought I wasn't looking. Projects I approved suddenly rerouted to subsidiaries I hadn't signed off on. I should have seen it sooner. I should have known. But there's a part of you when you've built something from scratch that doesn't want to believe the rot has reached your own foundation. One morning, I sat in my office sipping coffee and looking over quarterly reports. The numbers didn't lie. Funds were being siphoned into shell companies, expenses inflated. Contracts handed off to firms that didn't exist 6 months ago. My pulse quickened. I picked up the phone and called a board meeting that afternoon. We sat around the mahogany table I'd chosen years ago, back when the company was still mine in spirit and not just in name. The air smelled faintly of polish and tension. I slid the reports across the table. "Someone," I said, keeping my voice steady, "is bleeding this company dry. Millions have vanished into ghost firms, and I want to know who authorized it." Daniel smirked, the way he always did when he thought he was the smartest man in the room. "Maybe you're just looking at the numbers wrong, Margaret." "Wrong." I shot back. "I built this company on numbers. Don't tell me I can't read my own reports." Victor leaned back, hands behind his head, wearing that insufferable calm. "You've been under a lot of stress. These things happen. Let us handle the finances for a while. You should take some time for yourself." Evelyn gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're only thinking of your health. Their words dripped with condescension. And yet their eyes, especially Evelyn's, were hard, calculating. That's when it hit me. They weren't just covering their tracks. They thought I was slipping. They wanted me out. I left that meeting with fury boiling in my veins, but I still told myself I'd fight. After all, I'd fought my entire life. I didn't realize then just how far they were willing to go. The invitation came a week later. Dinner at Victor's estate. To clear the air, he said, his tone syrupy sweet. I hesitated, but part of me still clung to hope. We'd been partners for decades. Surely there was some way to salvage what we'd built. Victor's house was exactly what you'd expect. Sprawling glass walls, pretentious art pieces, the kind of place that screams money without taste. A single long table was set for two, candles flickering between us. He poured the wine himself, swirling it in his glass like a sommelier. "Two new beginnings," he said. Lifting his glass, I hesitated before clinking mine against his. The wine tasted rich, full-bodied, normal. We made small talk at first stock prices, new contracts, the kind of meaningless chatter meant to fill silence. But halfway through the meal, my stomach clenched. My vision blurred. My hands began to tremble. "Are you all right, Margaret?" Victor's voice was smooth, almost too smooth. "I'm fine," I muttered, excusing myself to the bathroom. I gripped the sink, staring at my reflection. My face was pale, lips tinged faintly blue. A cold sweat broke across my skin. That's when the realization hit me like a fist. This wasn't food poisoning. This was deliberate. I splashed water on my face, steadied my breath, and forced myself back to the table. "I think I should go," I said, trying to sound casual. Victor's smile didn't falter. "Of course. Rest well." Every nerve in my body screamed danger. But I played along. I drove home, knuckles white on the steering wheel, the world tilting and spinning around me. Each red light felt like an eternity. By the time I stumbled through my front door, I collapsed onto the couch, gasping for air. I should have called 911. I should have gone to the hospital. But pride and fear tangled inside me. Pride because I didn't want anyone, especially them, to know I was weak. Fear because what if they were already watching, waiting for me to make a move? So I lay there all night, sweating, shivering, praying. At some point, I must have drifted into a fevered sleep. When I opened my eyes, sunlight streamed through the blinds. My body ached, but I was alive, alive and burning with a new clarity. They hadn't just tried to steal my company. They had tried to steal my life. And that was the day I stopped being the Margaret who built Whitmore and steal for everyone else. That was the day I became the Margaret who would take everything back. When I woke the next morning, my body felt like it had been wrung dry. My muscles ached, my head throbbed, and every breath was a reminder that I had come dangerously close to never waking up at all. I sat on the couch for a long while, just listening to the sound of my own heartbeat, steady but fragile. The truth weighed on me. I wasn't invincible. I was 60 years old, and no amount of grit or experience could change the fact that my so-called partners had tried to put me in the ground. I made myself a cup of tea weak, the way my mother used to make it when I was sick as a little girl. As the steam rose, I remembered her voice, calm and firm. "You've got to use your mind, Margaret. Strength fades, but a sharp mind will save you every time." My mind. That was still mine, and I would use it to destroy them. For days, I stayed quiet. I answered no calls, attended no meetings. I let them think I was weak, maybe even broken. If Victor and his snakes believed I was fading, they'd get sloppy. And when predators get sloppy, that's when you set the snare. But I needed information. Hard evidence. Something the board, the authorities even, the FBI couldn't ignore. That's when I thought of Thomas Callahan. Thomas was a retired detective, mid-60s, with a face lined by decades of lies he'd sifted through. He'd worked fraud, racketeering, white-collar crime. We'd met years ago at a charity gala, both of us outsiders in a sea of social climbers. He was blunt, unimpressed by wealth, and sharp as a blade. If anyone could help me untangle the web Victor had spun, it was him. I found his number in an old Rolodex I hadn't touched in years. When he picked up, his voice was gravelly suspicious. "Callahan Thomas, it's Margaret Whitmore." A pause. "Then, haven't heard that name in a while. What kind of trouble are you in?" The corner of my mouth twitched. He always had a way of cutting straight through. The kind where my business partners are trying to kill me. Silence stretched on the line. Finally, he said, "Meet me. Tomorrow. The diner on 8th noon." I arrived early. The diner was the kind of place that smelled of burnt coffee and bacon grease, with red vinyl booths that had seen better decades. I slid into a corner seat, nerves taut as a violin string. Thomas walked in 10 minutes later, trench coat over a worn suit, his gray hair slicked back. He spotted me instantly and slid across the booth. "You look like hell," he said. "Good to see you too. Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the reports, the ghost companies, the dinner at Victor's estate, the poison. I told him about Evelyn's cold smile, Daniel's smirk, Victor's steady hand pouring the wine. When I finished, my throat was raw. Thomas didn't speak right away. He stirred his coffee, eyes narrowed in thought. Finally, he leaned in. "You don't go to the cops yet. Not without proof they can't bury. These people have money, lawyers, influence. If you show your hand too early, they'll paint you as paranoid or senile. You need evidence and not just paper trails. You need to catch them in the act. And how do you suggest I do that?" He gave a thin smile. "You set a trap." The word sent a thrill through me. A trap. That was exactly what they deserved. We spent hours sketching out possibilities. Thomas explained how fraud cases often collapse because prosecutors couldn't prove intent. They'll say it was bad bookkeeping, miscommunication, anything but deliberate theft. You need them to incriminate themselves, Margaret. You need them talking, planning, and you need a way to record it. My mind spun with the possibilities. The boardroom, the estate, private meetings I knew where they liked to talk freely, where they felt untouchable. I also knew their egos. They loved to gloat, to talk in circles about their genius. If I baited them just right, they'd hang themselves with their own words for weeks. I played the part of the weekend matriarch. I missed meetings, stumbled in late, acted distracted. I let rumors swirl that I was unwell. Evelyn smirked openly now in board meetings, practically daring me to challenge her. Victor grew more confident, taking over decisions without consulting me. Daniel strutted as if he already sat in my chair. And all the while, Thomas and I were laying the groundwork. He found an old contact who specialized in surveillance hidden recorders so small they could be tucked into pens, brooches, even the base of a flower vase. I authorized renovations in the executive suite, using the excuse of updating the decor. In reality, every corner was being wired. Then came the hardest part, the bait. One afternoon, I called Victor, Evelyn, and Daniel into my office. My hands trembled not with fear, but with fury I forced into stillness. "I've been reviewing the numbers," I said softly, sliding a folder across the desk. "You're right. I don't have the energy for this anymore. I think it's time I stepped back." Evelyn's eyes gleamed. Daniel nearly laughed. Victor feigned concern. "Margaret," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We only want what's best for you. I know. I said, lowering my gaze. That's why I'd like to hear your ideas. How would you transition things? What would you need from me to make it smooth? They took the bait. For the next hour, they talked freely, too freely, about restructuring, about offshore accounts, about cleaning up the board once I was out of the way. Evelyn outlined how they could siphon more funds without triggering audits. Daniel boasted about the shell companies he'd already set up. And Victor. Victor sat back, letting them incriminate themselves. But every now and then, he added his approval. Every word was being recorded when they finally left. I sat alone in my office, my heart pounding. It had worked. The trap was closing, but I wasn't ready to spring it yet. Not until I was sure they were in so deep they couldn't climb out. The following weeks were a dance of patience and precision. I let them think they'd won. I signed papers I knew were fraudulent, documents Thomas had already copied and secured. I smiled faintly when Evelyn strutted down the hallway like she owned the building. I nodded when Daniel bragged about his brilliant strategies. All the while, the net grew tighter, and then came the night they tried again. I'd just left the office. The city quiet under a blanket of snow. My car was parked in the underground garage. As I walked toward it, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Daniel, his face twisted with something ugly. You should have stayed out. Margaret, he hissed. Before I could react, another figure emerged, Devlin. She held something in her hand. A syringe. My stomach dropped, but just as she stepped forward, lights blazed. Shouts echoed. FBI, drop it. Agents swarmed. Weapons drawn. Evelyn froze. Daniel stumbled back, hands in the air. I stood there, my breath fogging in the cold air, heart hammering. The trap had sprung, and they'd walked straight into it. Victor was arrested days later, caught on the recordings Thomas and I had secured. Evelyn and Daniel were let out in handcuffs, their faces pale with shock. They thought I was weak. They thought I was finished. But I had spent my entire life learning that survival isn't about strength. It's about strategy. And this time, the lesson was theirs. When the FBI van rolled away, taillights glowing red against the snowy night, I just stood in that garage for a long moment, frozen in place. My breath came in ragged clouds. My knees weak. For 60 years, I had believed I'd seen it all: wars, recessions, betrayals, even losing my husband before his time. But nothing compared to the surreal sight of my so-called partners being shoved into federal custody like cornered rats. Thomas appeared at my side, his trench coat collar turned up against the wind. You all right? I let out a laugh that sounded more like a cough. I'm alive. You're more than alive, he said, his eyes sharp. You just dismantled an empire of crooks with nothing but your brains and a few wires. I sank against the hood of my car, shaking. It still doesn't feel real. He looked at me for a long beat. Oh, it's real. And now comes the hard part. What's that? Taking your company back the next morning. The world woke up to headlines splashed across every major outlet. Whitmore Partners indicted on fraud, conspiracy charges. FBI sting reveals poison plot against founder. I watched the news with my coffee in hand, equal parts vindicated and hollow. The anchors used my name with reverence, as though I'd already become a symbol of survival and cunning. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt raw, because behind every headline was the reminder people I'd once broken bread with, laughed with, toasted victories with they had tried to kill me. Not in metaphor, but in the most literal, brutal way. And that wasn't something you shrugged off. The board convened in an emergency meeting 3 days later. The conference room was buzzing when I walked in, whispers snapping like static. Men and women who had once averted their eyes now looked at me with open awe, even fear. I sat at the head of the table. My table. Let's get something straight, I said, my voice steady. This company has been dragged through the mud. Investors are scared. Employees don't know if they'll have jobs tomorrow. And the public thinks we're a criminal circus. We're not going to survive if we don't clean house starting today. One of the older board members, Mrs. Halpern, cleared her throat. Margaret, you've been through a terrible ordeal. Maybe you should consider stepping aside, resting. Let someone else handle the recovery. I met her gaze without blinking. I nearly died in this fight. Don't you dare suggest I sit on the sidelines now. This company is mine. My name is on those doors. My sweat is in every brick of this building. If anyone's going to drag us back into the light, it's me. Silence. Then, slowly, heads began to nod. I had my throne back. But keeping it would take more than speeches. Over the following weeks, I worked tirelessly. 12-hour days turned into 14. I rewrote policies, overhauled compliance, hired auditors who answered only to me. I met with investors one by one, looking them in the eye, promising stability, transparency, safety. Some wavered. A few pulled out. But the court, the ones who believed in me, stood firm. At night, though the weight pressed down, I'd go home to my silent townhouse, pour a glass of wine, and stare at old photos. My husband Robert smiling on our wedding day. My daughter Claire hugging me after graduating college. Both gone now, both ghosts I whispered to in the dark. Am I doing this for me? Or for you? Sometimes I swore I heard Robert's voice in reply. For you, Maggie. Always for you. The turning point came with the annual shareholder meeting. Normally, it was a polished affair, glittering hotel ballrooms, catered dinners, speeches full of buzzwords. But this year, it felt more like a trial. Hundreds of shareholders sat with crossed arms, skepticism radiating. Cameras flashed. Journalists lined the back. I walked onto the stage in a charcoal gray suit, my silver hair swept back. No teleprompter, no script. Just me. I took a deep breath. Many of you know what's happened. You've read the articles. You've seen the arrests. I won't sugarcoat it. Whitmore Global has been poisoned from the inside by people I trusted, people who smiled at me while sharpening their knives. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but here's what you need to know. I am still here. I survived. And this company will survive too, not because of shady shortcuts, not because of greed, but because of resilience. That's been the Whitmore way since the beginning. And as long as I draw breath, it will stay that way. The room erupted into applause. Flashbulbs blinded me. For the first time in months, I felt not like a victim, but a leader again, of course. This story wasn't over. A week later, I received a letter. No return address, typed words, "This isn't finished. We'll come back for what's ours." My hands trembled as I held it. The poison had failed. The FBI sting had worked. But somewhere out there, remnants of Victor's empire still lurked. I called Thomas. He came over, scanned the letter, and frowned. Could be a bluff. Could be serious. Doesn't matter. You stay ready? You've already proven you can outthink them. I nodded, folding the letter carefully. Then we'll be ready. Because if there was one lesson my life had drilled into me, it was this. You don't stop when the storm clears. You build stronger walls. And I was just getting started. But something else was stirring inside me. Something softer, yet just as powerful. One evening, I visited the old neighborhood where I'd grown up. The houses were smaller now, the paint peeling, the streets quieter. In a community center window, I saw a flyer, women over 50, starting over workshop. I went inside. Dozens of women sat in folding chairs, gray hair. Tired faces, but sparks in their eyes. They were learning about finances, small business grants, computer skills. The leader, a woman named Grace, greeted me warmly. "You're welcome to sit in." Most of these women are looking for second chances, sometimes third or fourth. I listened to their stories, widows left with nothing, grandmothers raising grandchildren, women pushed out of jobs by younger hires. Their pain was raw, but their determination was undeniable. Something inside me shifted. I had been fighting only for my company, my name. But what if my fight could mean more? What if I used my experience, my resources, to build something that lifted these women too? That night I called Thomas. "I think I know what's next," I said. "Oh," he asked. "I'm going to build a program for women like us, overlooked, undervalued, written off. I want to teach them what I've learned, the strategies, the resilience, the fight. If I can claw my way back from betrayal and poison, so can they." He chuckled. "You always did think big. Big is the only way I know." And so, as winter thawed into spring, two battles unfolded. One in the boardroom, where I secured Whitmore Global's survival. The other in my heart, where I planted the seeds of something far greater than revenge. But revenge still had one final chapter, because Victor wasn't done, and neither was I. They always say evil doesn't die easy. And Victor, he was too slick, too proud, too venomous to go quietly. I should have expected it. It was April, just as tulips were beginning to bloom in my garden, when Thomas called. His voice was tight. "Victor's out on bail," he said. "House arrest. But you and I both know a man like him won't stay put." My chest tightened. "What are the chances he tries something again?" Thomas sighed. "If I were a betting man?" "Hi." I set down my pruning shears and looked at the flower bed. Bright yellow blooms reached toward the sun, stubborn and bold. "Like me, then, let him try," I said. The weeks crawled by. Whitmore Global was steadying, investors slowly regaining confidence. My mentorship idea was blossoming to an already rented space for the program and recruited volunteers. Dozens of women over 50 signed up, eager to learn how to navigate a world that had dismissed them. But the letter burned in the back of my mind. This isn't finished. One evening, after a long board meeting, I returned home to find my front door ajar. My stomach dropped. I froze on the porch, every instinct screaming. "Thomas," I whispered into the phone. "He's here. Stay put. I'm on my way. Don't go inside." But I was already stepping through the door. The house smelled faintly of cigar smoke. And then I heard his voice, low and venomous, drifting from the living room. "Always had a flair for drama, Maggie. But you can't outplay me forever." He stepped into view, his face gaunter, his eyes wild. He was a man unraveling. "Victor," I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled, "you should have stayed gone." He laughed bitterly. "Gone? After everything I built, everything I deserve. You think you can take it all and walk away the hero? You poisoned me. You tried to bury me and you survived," he snarled. "That's the problem." I took a step closer. "The real problem, Victor, is that you still underestimate me." Before he could reply, red and blue lights flooded through the window. The FBI stormed in, Thomas at their side. Victor spun, his face pale. "You set me up again." I allowed myself a thin smile. "You set yourself up. I just gave you the stage." The agents cuffed him, dragging him out as he screamed curses, threats, promises of revenge. But I knew this time it was over. The evidence was airtight, the charges ironclad. He wouldn't see freedom again. When the door shut and the house was quiet, Thomas exhaled. "You really can't resist baiting the trap, can you?" I sank into a chair, trembling with relief. It's the only way I know how to survive. The trial was brutal months of testimony. Headlines, cameras outside the courthouse. But when the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, I felt a weight lift. I hadn't realized I was carrying. Victor was finished, and I was free. The following year was a blur of rebuilding, not just Whitmore Global, but myself. I threw myself into the mentorship program. Women who'd been told they were too old, too slow, washed up, walked through those doors with their heads bowed. And one by one, they left standing taller, with business plans in hand, confidence in their eyes. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. One evening after a workshop, a woman named Denise approached me. She was 62, recently divorced, scared of starting over. "I never thought I'd say this," she said, tears in her eyes, "but watching you fight back, it makes me believe I can too." I squeezed her hand. "You don't have to believe yet. Just start. The belief comes later." Years later, when I looked back, the betrayal and the poison seemed less like the end of my story and more like the turning point. The fire that nearly consumed me became the same fire that lit my second life. I used to think my legacy would be Whitmore Global alone, but now I see it clearly. My legacy is resilience. It's the women who refuse to be erased, who turn pain into power, who write their own endings. And if there's one thing I want anyone listening to this to remember, it's this. They may try to silence you. They may try to bury you. But if you keep your wits, your courage, and your fire, you will rise again. I know, because I did.